when did Graham get his first quote unquote job? And not necessarily the one after high. Like, were you doing anything in school, or was your job to go to school and get good grades?
My first job that I really there was a thing in, I don't even know if this doesn't count, but I've never told this one before. I was in, I think it was kindergarten.
Okay.
And you got to leave class a little early to go help the lunch lady.
Oh, okay.
And so I took it. And I think I was the only kid in the class that took this thing. And I'm like, why wouldn't you take this? You would get a free lunch. And back then, by the way, there's not the concept of my parents couldn't afford food for me,
right.
but just the idea that I would be able to get this lunch provided. And I'd get a free lunch. I would do that because my parents would never give me money to go lunch. They'd pack me to lunch. So I thought it was cool. I get a free lunch out of this, a free cafeteria hot lunch.
Nice. Okay.
And I'd help out the lunch lady. I had so much fun doing that. So they would put me with the hairnet on and the gloves.
And you're
and
5 or 6.
Apron, something like that. Yeah. And I'd be behind. I thought it was so cool that the kids would come up and I was in charge of potatoes or something like that, or macaroni. And I'd sit there and put it on the plate.
Wow. And
I loved it. It was just, for me, it was cool to do something like that.
Okay.
And I just enjoyed it. But from that, I think, I was never just into school. I went to an alternative school in Los Angeles where they didn't have any grades. They didn't have any structure. Everyone, they called it different cores. You were core 1, core 2, core 3. Core 1 was kindergarten, first, second. Core 2 is third, fourth, fifth. And then you had 6, 7, 8. So all the grades were together in one.
Okay.
So I was in a class with people 2 years older, and 2 years later, I was in a class with 2 years younger. And we'd all have these group classes. No grades. We get checks, check plus, check minuses.
Wow.
And I mean, I think it was a bit of a joke in terms of learning, but it really taught you just interpersonal dynamics, expressing your feelings, thinking outside the box, questioning why we do things the way, and I think that really helped me. So I was never into school. Okay. I think I was just kind of used to that sort of environment where we question things and we do things our own way, and we're all celebrated for being individuals and everyone's unique. And so that's kind of how I grew up. And I must have been 11 years old, so this is 2001. I was really into having pets, and my dad would go and get me a pet tarantula, or a leopard gecko, or just cool things. So I was always into pets. But I'd go to Allen's Aquarium in Los Angeles on Lincoln Boulevard, and I'd see the saltwater fish.
Sure.
And my parents were like, no, you're not going to get saltwater fish because it's really hard to maintain. It's really expensive. We can't do saltwater.
Yeah.
We can do freshwater.
Okay.
But I always wanted saltwater. And I think my dad teamed up with my grandma one year for, it was either a birthday or a Christmas, and they got me a saltwater aquarium.
Nice.
I was hooked. And this is about the time the internet was coming to be.
Okay.
So I would go on the internet and I'd type in saltwaterfish.com. And just and they had a forum. So I'd be on this forum all the time, talking to these people about aquariums. I got so into it. And just in the process of doing that, I think I would just get home from school, and all I wanted to do is go on saltwaterfish.com and talk aquariums with people online. That's all I wanted to do. And I'd before I go to bed, I would check and see if people commented on my threads, because these were bulletin boards back then.
Yep.
And I checked the comments, and I thought it was so cool. But that evolved.
And again, you're 12-ish.
I was 12. Yeah, something like that. But I had this hyper fixation on saltwater aquariums for whatever reason.
You found your thing, you focused, and you just daily discipline.
Yeah, and what ended up happening, I went from that forum to reeflounge.com to, and then there was reefcentral.com, which was the big aquarium forum at the time. Everyone was on Reef Central. And I found a local aquarium enthusiast meetup. I think it was called MASLAC or something. The Marine Aquarium of Los Angeles County. Marine Aquarium Enthusiast of Los Angeles County. It's something like that. And I'd go to these monthly meetings for aquarium enthusiasts who would rent out a back room at Denny's.
Right.
And there would be someone giving a presentation on the ideal calcium if you want to grow certain corals, or the ideal pH, how to set up a marine tank. I was just enthralled by this thing. My parents would go with me, and they were really supportive.
Wow.
Take me to the Denny's, and I was a kid, and I'd just get introduced to all these people. But what really changed it for me is I got a digital camera. Again, for a birthday or a Christmas, I got really into photography. So I'd take pictures of my aquarium and then post it on the forums. And people would comment on it, and I thought it was pretty good because I'd be really into macro photography. And there was a meetup. It was called a frag swap.
Okay.
And so it would be a thing where all the coral that you saw in that tank, I could go in with scissors and cut it,
okay,
and then give it to somebody else or sell it to somebody else. They'll plant it on the rock and it'll grow into another colony. And they could, so people would go and take pieces of their coral and trade them with each other.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a lot better than taking it from the ocean. You want it raised in an aquarium.
Yeah, okay.
So I would go to these frag swaps and take pictures of like people's tanks, because everyone would host it at their house, or take pictures of coral. And through that, I met someone who was the manager of this like marine aquarium wholesaler.
Sure.
And said, hey, we're really into this. We can talk to your parents, but if you're interested, come by. We can just show you the place. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this, like they were a sponsor of like Reef Central. So you would see like their banner at the top. I thought this like, oh my God, like the big deal here.
Right.
So my parents drove me down, and I was just taking photos of everything. I was just so interested in it. And the owner, his name was Chris. And we actually had him on the podcast at the Iced Coffee Hour as one of our first episodes,
That's
which
awesome.
was really cool to have. But he asked me if I wanted to just help out after school, and he checked with my parents.
Sure.
It's like, he's 12 years old, but if like he wants us to just come and help, and he could help take pictures, he could help take care of some of the livestock and make boxes.
Right.
And they said yes. So I think it was every like Tuesday and Thursday I'd go after school. And they would just drop me off. Like, I think the first few times they're a little cautious, so they're like going to hang out. But then after like the third or fourth time, they realize this guy's not a creep. He's got a family. He's he's legit. So they drop me off at like 3 p.m. and pick me up at like 8. But the entire time I was just like bagging up fish and coral. I was making boxes. I was helping piece together
you were having
orders.
the time of your life.
I loved it. It was the funnest thing. They'd give me like a sheet like this that would say like 3 of these fish, 5 of these snails, 2 of these corals. And I would go through and then find them in the whole warehouse and put them in rows. And then those rows would be backed up by somebody else. But I would go through, or they'd give me the sheet and say, make sure all these rows are correct.
Oh, okay.
And I'd go through and, find everything. And sometimes I'd be like, this piece doesn't look quite healthy. And I'd point that out and we swap it in with a new one. I loved it. But that's what got me into working. But that moment for me made me realize, like, why am I going to school? Like, I just want to do work, and like I really like this, and there's no point in going to school because I just want to do this. Even at the time, I wasn't making any money. But I was getting paid in fish and coral,
Which
so,
to you was more than enough.
Yeah. So at the end of the week, he would say, "Okay, you could take home, X dollars in fish, or pick out this piece of coral that you want." And that's all I needed.